Namaste, bitches. Welcome to another installment of Dumb Woke. Today, I'm going to be talking about a little bit about karma or karma cycles. But before I do start, I just wanted to set a precedent to say, I'm not a guru. I'm not no spiritual teacher. I'm not no registered therapist. I'm none of those things. I'm just I'm just a dude going through life, navigating the world, learning some lessons along the way, and I'm just sharing those insights and those lessons with you. And of course, if anyone has any feedback, any thoughts that they have of their own that they would like to share, please do so. I'm always open to it. And I think this is an opportunity for me to learn from you guys and learn from each other. So again, what is karma, or karma, as white women in yoga studios like to call it. Essentially, what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit about what karmic cycles mean to me, and my understanding of it, and the basics and things of that nature. But what I wanted to start off by talking about was kind of the misconceptions that I feel people have about what karma is, especially in the Western world. I think, it's become, the term has become very popular, and I think the way people see it or view it is this idea of what goes around comes around. You know what I mean? For every negative action or negative event that you put out into the world, that's what you're going to get in return. But it doesn't necessarily have to be within this lifetime. I think the misconception people have is like, if I go steal something from someone else, or if I thief something from someone else, that I'm gonna face the repercussions for it, a week after or a month after, or whatever the case is. And another misconception people have is that it always has to be negative. There's also things such as positive karma. So I think a better phrase to kind of describe it, in my opinion, is the idea of you will reap what you sow. The same way when you plant a seed in a garden, the plant doesn't grow the next day or within the next hour. It takes time for it to flourish. The same way that certain events and certain responses and certain actions that you put out into the world, they'll take time to manifest a consequence to that action, and that consequence doesn't necessarily mean negative consequences. It just means a counteraction to the action that you had. The same way the laws of physics says, with every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. It doesn't mean it has to be within the same lifetime. It could transcend generations, and I think that's what the idea of transcending or dissolving our karmic cycles or karmic cycles means, right? And when I hear terms like this, when I hear spiritual elements such as karma or whatever the case may be, is I like to also look at it from a point of view of practicality. How can I use this knowledge, or how can I use this term in a practical sense and apply it to the way I see the real world, right? And the way I like to see karmic cycles is equivalent to this idea of intergenerational trauma, which has been a growing study in the field of psychology for some time now, especially in recent times. And I think a perfect illustration of that was this book by Mark Wolyn. It's called It Didn't Start With You. And it basically talks about intergenerational trauma. He's a neuroscientist as well as a psychologist. So he looks at, brain chemistry, the biology of human beings, as well as, our response to behavior based off of that biology or that brain chemistry, And the book really encompasses that idea of how trauma that our forefathers, our ancestors, or generations before us have endured can almost be passed down through our DNA and through generations to come. And one of the examples that he gives several examples in the book, but one of the examples that he gave was this individual who was severely afraid, he had a phobia of drowning, right? He was just scared to swim, but there was no event in his childhood or in his earlier years of any, kind of traumatic event that took place while he was swimming or in the water. There was nothing of the sort. And then through looking at his family history and his family tree, it was found that his great-grandfather actually died from drowning, but that fear, for whatever reason, was still instilled in him, even though he's never met the dude. And I think that was just a prime example of how those fears can be passed down. And on a chemical level or on a biological level is, when we look at our bodies respond to stress, right? The way our body responds to stress, or, something that's more common now that I think is growing in popularity is the idea of fight or flight, right? When you look at the idea of fight or flight, when our amygdala is activated, there's certain physiological changes that also take place. Our heart begins to beat faster, our blood begins to pump quicker as well, our breathing becomes more shallow, our digestive tract actually slows down because our body's trying to lighten its load, is getting ready to run away from something or fight against some kind of danger, right? The same way when our body is responding to stress, our brain actually releases this chemical called cortisol, right? And cortisol releases based off of the level of stress that you're feeling, meaning that if you're more stressed, the more level of cortisol will be released into your brain, right? And it's actually been proven that the same level of cortisol that you release is going to be equivalent, or at least it's going to be more likely that your child and your children are going to release that same level of cortisol, meaning the same way that you respond to feelings of stress, the same way you respond to feelings of fear is going to be equivalent to the way your children respond to that stress or respond to that fear, not just in a behavioral level, but also on a chemical level, right? Like their brain chemistry is like essentially adapting to the way yours has adapted, and I think that's a perfect illustration of how not just trauma begins to transcend into future generations, but also how we respond to the world itself, how we respond to certain events that take place, and as a more personal example that I can think of is like, I remember back in like grade 9 or grade 10, I got jumped at like 6 in the morning, right? These dudes took my phone and my chain, and it's fucked up because it's like, yo, it's 6 a.m. You're not expecting to get no scrap at 6 in the morning, you know what I mean? But and I still had morning wood. Like, how weird it is to get robbed with your dick hard? Like, I'm daydreaming about titties and these mans are running up on me like, yo, so what is that, dog, right? But I just remember that situation, and I remember just being so afraid that like I just froze, you know what I mean? I didn't fight back, I didn't run away, I kind of just stood there and I didn't really know what to do. And I remember prior to that event even happening, for majority of my life I was afraid, you know what I mean? I used to walk around with a feeling of anxiety, a feeling of fear, and I never really understood why. I was kind of always contemplating or waiting for something bad to happen. And I don't want to say that like that was in my karma, because I feel like people also use that term as a means to justify why individuals go through traumatic events or suffering, and I don't think that's the case, right? I don't think you can always blame an external source. Like if a child goes through a traumatic event or suffering abuse, like I'm not going to sit here and say, well, it was written in their karma, it's their karma, that's why they're enduring this, because I think that takes away our responsibility that we have to humanity. You know what I mean? We're blaming an external source for this unnecessary suffering that's occurring, rather than looking inward and seeing what we can do to transcend those cycles that cause us to elicit suffering onto others, or basically to elicit those actions onto others, but going back to that story that I was talking about previously, I just remember like, again, after that took place, I was still afraid for a long time. I was still anxious for a long time. And even prior to that, it was like I was living my day-to-day life in this feeling of fear. And I never really understood why, and I think looking at, certain aspects aspects of like my my ancestors or my family members that came before me, my mother, my uncle, my great grandparents, my grandparents, and seeing kind of the history or the way of life that they had endured, and the suffering that they had to endure, right? Because they came from a time where, you know, India and Pakistan first became separated. They also came from a time where there was an immense amount of abuse happening to the Sikh community, and many of their peers, their neighbors were getting killed off. They heard stories of them being burnt alive, and they had to flee their home country to come to Canada and start a new life with children of their own, you know, and all they knew was survival. You know what I mean? And I think growing up in that mindset, that's how you view the world, and that's how you perceive the world to be, is a place where you just need to survive. And that same essence of survival is passed down to your younger generation. So I think growing up on top of the family tree and the lineage, and also just growing up in the neighborhood that I did, the idea of survival was all that you knew. You know what I mean? And especially for young men, to walk around with a sense of fear was also a sign of weakness. So a lot of young men in my community were masking it and hiding it by, you know, either displaying their hurt as anger or rage, or getting into fights and things like that to show that, like, yo, I'm not afraid, I'm not weak. But as we know, those actions only can withstand so long until a person begins to implode or self-destruct, you know? And I think in that moment, and in recognizing where those patterns came from and those perceptions came from, I was able to realize, like, I'm living my life through the eyes of their trauma, through their pain, through their suffering. And then once you recognize that you no longer have to survive, is when you finally begin to live. And I think that moment for me was, you know, liberating, and I began to see the world in a new light. And you know, but I think that only came with recognizing the internal patterns that had been instilled in me, you know, not just the negative parts of it, but also the, like, you know, the positive sense of learning how to care for a family, for a household, and building those trusting relationships within your tribe, you know? Because my bad, I don't want to get too emotional in this, because I think, like, that was a huge component of it, you know? But on top of those positive cycles, there are those things that can be a detriment to us. And I think in recognizing that and seeing those cycles being repeated within ourselves is the first step into dissolving those patterns from reoccurring, you know? And in that instance of what I was talking about, of the incident of me of me getting jumped, is, you know, after the fact, I was still furious. I was still angry, not just at the people, but also at myself for not feeling as though I could have done anything. You know what I mean? I was very angry with myself and not being able to stand up for myself and not be able to, you know, essentially hurt them, you know? And I realized at that moment that, you know, maybe that incident within itself wasn't written in my karma, but my response to the situation was my karmic doing. That was my karmic cycle of how I chose to respond to the situation. Did I try to respond to that situation by digging myself a deeper hole, or did I respond to it by acknowledging that, you know, there's going to be certain elements in life that are out of our control, but our only real power comes with how we choose to respond to the situation afterwards. And I think that was a lesson, a karmic lesson for me, to realize how to dissolve, again, another pattern, another karmic cycle that I was dealing with, is that essence of, you know, just not learning to love myself and not being able to love myself, you know? So I think the importance of recognizing where our karmic cycle comes from, and the karmic cycles and the patterns that we do hold, is not so that we can build a better life for us, but essentially you're building a better future, right? Because the way we respond to stress, the way we respond to anger, the way we respond to fear, not just on a physical level, but on a biological level, on an energetic level, is the same way we're going to pass it down to the generations to come forward. And if there's elements in your life right now where you wish you were able to alleviate and dissolve, ask yourself, would you want someone else that comes after you to see the life in the same way? Or would you want them to see a better way? And the only way that they can find a better way to live or a better way to see the world and life itself is if you do that. And, you know, again, going back to my previous video of taking responsibility for ourselves, I think that's when we recognize that we are only responsible for alleviating the pain that we've endured and the trauma that we've endured. But in doing so, we also alleviate the trauma and the fears and the pain that maybe our ancestors may have faced up until this point. You know, I know that was a lot, and this was one of my longer videos, but I feel like I needed to get all of that out in order for it to make sense. Again, I hope you took something away from this. If you have any thoughts, feedback, things you would like to ask or add or you know, talk about, I'm very open to it. I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. And I hope you guys stay blessed. Thank you. Namaste, bitches. Peace and love.